Bombshell Brunches, where your hosts Raquel Rudenberg and Christina Lau sip and spill with badass babes every Tuesday morning. It is Tuesday.
That wasn't too bad. Cool. Happy Tuesday. Hi, everybody. Hi, babeses. Let's do it. Let's do learning, loving, loathing.
Why don't you start?
Okay. I am learning about how to let things go internally, how to kind of just be a little bit kinder to myself as the winter months roll in. I have been learning and observing since this episode we recorded with Tam how to identify kind of my down days, and it's been really, really useful. And I am loving allowing myself to treating myself kindly. I'm really loving that. And I think that you and I have had really, really very, very busy months, and we're in a pandemic, and it's sometimes you and I both bulldoze through things and forget to treat ourselves well. So those are my 3 this week.
You pretty much stole mine. I'm not gonna lie. Okay, so my learning literally is written down as let it go.
You're kidding. Oh my goodness. You didn't even tell me. That's so
which
wonderful.
was a takeaway. It was a takeaway from our talk with Tam. So you guys will hear about that. But mine was applied a little bit different. So mine is learning to let go any kind of those issues I have with people. So those things that kind of tick me off, or that I would normally mention, or whatever, I'm learning to just let it go.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's a long-term strategy for me, but in the moment when things are so crazy, this is how we're rolling. So I'm loving the release of weight that gives me, because the thing is, when you don't let something go, then it ruminates and you think about it, and it takes up way too much time, and I literally just actually don't have that time. So hence the letting it go. But I'm loving it. So it's kind of like given me the green light to just stop caring about that kind of stuff, which is lovely in the short term. And I am loathing the lack of time I have before I leave this beautiful country and my family and my 4 dogs. And yes, there are 4 dogs, and it's getting closer. And every moment I'm like, we're that much closer, but I'm so busy, so I don't have as much time as I'd like to spend with everyone before I go. But that's my loathe.
Well, that's a good loathe. And you know what? We're going to launch straight in, because Tam is this episode is just, I think, honestly, what we all need right now. And I know that's a huge assumption, but if it is what you need, then I'm very, very glad that we were able to bring it to you. So before we start, this is something that Tam does talk about, but for whatever it's worth, take a couple big breaths and get ready for a nice, relaxing hour with Tam. Talks with Tam. Enjoy. Tamara Adilman. Tam. I've known Tam for so long, almost the amount of time I've been in Vancouver. So we're going to launch straight in, because Raquel and I have gone back and forth about how many questions we're allowed to ask. and we struggled. But one of the biggest topics that we have and we want to talk about first is the state of the world, which is no small task. But the pandemic has, as you know, as we all know, thrown us into a complete state of disarray. Our relationships with ourselves, our relationships with our loved ones, our neighborhoods, the whole world over. We've all been placed under just incredible strain, and some amazing things have come from it, and some awful things have come from it. And I want to ask you so many questions, but the most pressing is, can you speak to what you've identified as some of the key, I guess, unnerving factors that surround the pandemic? Why are we feeling like this?
The unnerving factors. It is well, first of all, thanks for having me. Second of all, we've never been through this before. in our lives. And, you know, the state of the world is affecting all of us. I think it's the very first time that everyone on the planet is going through the same thing. And
Mm.
it is a crisis. So it's unnerving, it's scary, it's frustrating, it's everything. And in fact, you know, when you look at models of disaster relief, when there has been a disaster in the world, an earthquake or a hurricane, there's actually a model you can look at what happens during a disaster. And I think it's an interesting to think about in terms of the pandemic. And, you know, the first stage, and I'm talking about this in terms of stages, just to give you an idea of what we're all going through at the same time. And it's not one thing. The first stage is, you know, before the disaster, we're all going along with our lives. We've got plans and everything feels normal and we have hope. And many of us plan our lives like a year in advance, 2 years in advance. And that just went sideways. And so the first stage is called the heroic stage. And that is the very beginning where we like want to help each other. I don't know what any of you were doing, but I was like making hand sanitizer for my neighbors. And my next door neighbor was making these masks and everybody wants to help everybody. And, you know, at 7 o'clock, we're like hitting the pots and pans for the essential workers. So that's kind of that, like we all get together stage. And then kind of into that is what's called the honeymoon stage. That's when everything's new, you know, making sourdough and from a sourdough starter and not spending so much money anymore and, you know, going for walks with your friends. It's just all that new stuff that was kind of fun in the beginning. It was also March and April. So the weather was bright and it was spring. And, you know, it was like, well, this is scary new, but we've got this.
And what stage did you call that?
It's kind of the honeymoon stage. Like any new relationship, it's new.
You're inside my head.
It's hopeful. And, you know, we were slowing down. A lot of people I talked to is, oh my God, I never knew I spent so much money out to eat. I'm never going anywhere. So this is all the kind of stuff where it's like, yeah. Then we're at the next stage, and this is where we are now. And that's called disillusionment. We're bored, we're restless, we're sad. Everything is limited. Winter is coming, which is a whole other thing I would love for us to talk about.
Yeah.
And people are getting pissed. We're angry. It's like, fuck the rules. Right?
Yeah.
And it's this sinking of, wow, this is hard. How long is this going to go on for? Right?
Right.
And then the next stage, by the way, this isn't linear, but you know, things go in circles. But the next stage is called reconstruction. And that's when we have to live with this and see how it's going to pan out. And we don't really know that yet. I don't know about you two, but everyone's like, when there's a vaccine, as if we're all going to get a little shot and everything's going to go back to normal and be the same. Personally, I would put money down. That is not going to happen. It's not going to happen that way. It's not going to work for everyone. It's going to take a long time. So we're kind of stuck in this place of how long and how do we cope? And it's getting hard. It's getting harder, not easier. I mean, what do you two think? That's what I see.
Yeah. I mean, I think you took the words out of our heads, really.
Yeah. I'm seeing a lot of people who are starting to disbelieve, I guess, they're trying to step away from the fear, I think, a little bit. So
sure.
Whether that means they're not reading the news or saying that, you know, they don't believe the news, or this isn't as bad as they said. And now, you know, the economy's so hurt. There's a lot of kind of like pushing back on the pandemic, if you can.
I'm really oscillating.
Yeah.
I'm going back and forth. I'm like, oh, I've got to be really careful because something spikes my attention and I know that I need to be rational and reasonable. And then on the other side of it, I'm like, well, we have to keep going. So we have to keep going no matter what. So I justify, and then I don't really know what's in, you know, I don't really have a one path or another. I kind of change from day to day. And some days I'm like, I can't deal with the news. And other days I'm like, it's my responsibility to know what the news is saying. So yeah, I think the oscillation for me it's been pretty tiring.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask Tam, actually, because I love these phases. I mean, I don't love these phases. Don't get me wrong. These phases are not.
You love concepts.
I love the concept.
Yeah.
Thank you. But do you think this is the first time in probably Raquel and my generation, possibly your generation, and certainly the generations that have come after us, do you think this is the first time we've encountered anything like this? Is there anything we can liken it to?
That's such an interesting question. I would really have to think about it, but the first thing that comes up for me is no, we've never been through something like this in this way.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about the two of you. I personally haven't been affected by a war in my lifetime,
Right.
you know, geographically, although of course so many people have, that we probably know. And so this type, you know, I haven't been, you know, I want to knock on wood, like my grandmother would say.
Oh, yeah.
Haven't had an earthquake yet, but, you know, inevitably, you haven't lived through a hurricane, you know, but this is different because it's so global. And I hear what you're saying when you talk about that oscillating, because, you know, depending on your experience in this pandemic, you know, some people really minimize it and say, oh, you know, it's not that big a deal. And some people are really scared. And I think unless you actually know people who have been affected by COVID, who have contracted the virus and have gotten really sick and haven't really recovered, I know a number of those people. It somehow doesn't seem as serious as we actually know it to be. And then I'm sure all of us know some people who've had COVID and it's been a quote unquote, feels like a bad flu and they're fine. It's just we don't know.
Yeah. It's the unknown that really I've been trying to deconstruct my ideas of control, my perception of control for so much of my life. This was a huge one. I love to pretend that I'm in control of things, and this was the antithesis of that.
Yeah, for sure.
I just full on let go.
You just let go. So what does that look like? I'm so curious.
So, well, I'm moving in a month and a half to Amsterdam, which happens to be a bit of a hotbed right now. And I'm moving there for my master's. And I made that plan. Well, I applied for it at the beginning of the year. So right when kind of COVID started and I started working at home and I made the decision I was going to apply for the program. I did not anticipate getting in that quickly. But when I did, I thought this has been a dream for like 10 years. Like I'm doing it. I can't put it off. But I just took into consideration that I don't know what is going to happen. And I think because it's on such a global scale, it was actually easier for me to kind of let go. I've had, you know, flight issues, visa issues, whatever. And I just kind of like, I go through the steps. I'm very diligent. I'll do what I can. But I know that for me, that's where my power stops. I can do as much as I can, and then I have no power anymore. So I've just kind of let go. So I tell people, I'm like, yep, pandemic pending. I am moving at this date to this place. And people ask me all the time, they're like, oh, well, you know, are you afraid of moving? Are you afraid of going there at this time? It's by no means like Italy was or like the US is, but, you know, because it isn't great. It's definitely worse than we are. And I don't know, I just say to them, for me, I think all I can do is control my own actions. So I'm going to wear my mask. I'm going to sanitize. I'm going to, you know, do the best I can. I'm going to keep my pod small. I mean, when I move to another country, it'll be very small. and that's the best I can do. It's the same things I'm doing here.
Mhm.
And I'm not putting any plans on the sidelines anymore. But if it happens and I can't go, I can't go. It's
Right,
just,
right.
that's all you can do.
Yeah.
But
On the other side of it, just for because if we're not careful, I think it's so easy to talk about the pandemic and express the worries and the concerns. What are some of the things that you've seen, Tam, that have really blossomed out of this
I love that.
time for people? Or yourself, what are some things? Like, I loved the idea of, in the heroic stage of people being like, I've got more time. Are there any observations that you've made that you think may have encouraged us to be better people?
Absolutely. I think the better people part is, I think, really caring for others who are close to us, maybe staying in closer contact to people. I know that for myself, um, I, the folks that I see really regularly in a way maybe I wouldn't have before,
Mm-hmm.
because I see less people, but the quality is better. And
Yeah.
there's so, I know that just being creative about how you see people and what you do is really great now. I mean, I think we all miss, live performances and culture. It's truly been one of the hardest things. But, for me, like, I was watching live stream concerts for a while there. Every single night I was watching one artist and then another one. And it was really wonderful. I would never have done anything like that,
Mm-hmm.
For the winter now, and in my home space, we've set up an outdoor living space, with heaters and a big
It's so
tarps,
great.
so people can come over through the winter and still see each other without going inside. So, I mean, I just think there's ways of being creative and doing things, and the quality of relationships, I think, has really intensified. So I think that's been amazing. Um, as I say that, though, I do worry about the winter coming.
Mm.
I think that when this all began, it was challenging, but there was so much we could do in our lives.
In BC, particularly,
Just
I
go
have
out.
to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where we live, there's space and it's
Yeah.
beautiful. And it is so easy to do things with other people or just yourself outside.
Mm-hmm.
And now that's going to start to change for at least people in the Northern Hemisphere.
Mm-hmm.
And that really worries me, coupled with people's mental health really being challenged now. That's what I see. People are really starting to suffer in terms of their mental health. So I've already gotten off the hopeful train, haven't I? You said, what's
No,
good?
no,
I'm already on the
but
Debbie Downer side, but there has been some great things for sure. And then the
and
other thing I would say is people have
mm-hmm.
not been spending money the way they used to. That's the
Mm-hmm.
thing I hear time and time again. People have really kind of simplified their lives, and they've enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been really cool too. Sorry, Christina, what were you saying?
Tam, you're my favorite.
Oh,
Can I just say that anyone listening to this podcast, I don't know, Raquel and I do a lot of back and forth with our guests, and it's so amazing to really take note of the energy that comes through, that's so different with each guest. And Tam, you just have the most calming quality. Raquel and I had this really boisterous conversation just beforehand, and within 1 minute we're both kind of gone, oh yeah, calm. So I
oh,
just want to say thank you. I think that's the voice
for
that we
sure.
need in going into a time of seasonal affect disorder, of mental health struggles, more so now that we have a global pandemic. And I wanted to ask, actually, on that note, it's a really great segue into, can you describe some of the symptoms? For a lot of people, they don't know that they have SADS. They don't know that they are, how they're feeling. And I wanted to talk about the internal versus the external relationship we have with ourselves and with others around us. And actually, I know that I don't think you've been a Debbie Downer. I think a very empowering thing is to be able to express articulately how we're feeling and potentially why. So all that to say, explain to us, in your opinion, what it might feel like to have SADS, what it might feel like to have the difference between that and general anxiety. I mean, I don't know this at all.
Mm.
How would I go about understanding how I'm really feeling, and so I can tell somebody else?
Good questions. Well, I'll tell you a little bit about SADS, seasonal affective disorder, seasonal affective depression, it's often called. And truly, it is connected to the seasons. Um, it is, I mean, if you were to say, like, what exactly is it and what causes it? Like so many issues around mental health, I'm going to say we don't really know. But there's definitely some theories. And the theory with SADS is that your circadian rhythm, which is your biological clock, gets very disrupted when there's a lack of sunlight. And so what we know about SADS is that people who live farther away from the equator are more affected. As the sunlight decreases, particularly in a place like Vancouver, Seattle, places where there's a lot of rain, some of the Scandinavian countries, we see much more depression during winter months than perhaps in other geographical locations. Seems that serotonin decreases, melatonin decreases, and basically what happens is people begin to have depressive symptoms that they don't have any other time in the year. So probably starts about now, as the days start to get a little shorter and there's much less sunlight. Now, I've talked with people, for example, from, we're in Canada right now, so talking to people from the prairies or even from Montreal, from Quebec, where it's much colder, but there's much more sunlight. They don't seem to be as affected as they are in a place like Vancouver, where the temperatures are milder, but there's no sunlight. So it's not about the temperature, it's about the light.
Okay.
And so what you would feel if you had SADS, and if you do, you would know it by now as an adult. As winter begins, you're gonna, or kind of late fall actually, you're gonna want to sleep a lot more, low energy, feel unmotivated, just feel sad. Very often, people tend to want to eat a lot of carbohydrates for some reason. It's interesting. And there's a kind of loss of self, loss of joy. And then when the seasons change and daylight changes and the days are much longer, all of a sudden it lifts. So it's that seasonal. So what are the risk factors? Unfortunately, if you are born female, it's a higher risk factor. We don't know why. If there's a family history, and if you already are challenged by mental health issues like depression or bipolar disorder, absolutely, that's a risk factor. So when you have SADS, it's not so much that you're filled with anxiety. It's more just you feel depleted, tired, bummed out.
Generally low.
Generally low. And so what do, right? I mean, this is the question, because this is going to happen every year. So one of the things that seems to be quite helpful is called light therapy or phototherapy, which folks who are listening might have heard of. There's something called a light box that, you can buy, which is this intense light. You can't just sit under a regular light. Don't ask me to explain it, but it does have to do with lumens and things like that. And it's quite intense. So the studies show For example, if you get one of these lights, they used to be so expensive, but they're not anymore. I think it's a really good investment. And as soon as you wake up for 30 to 60 minutes, you wouldn't stare into it. It would be off to the side. And it seems to help. Perhaps change, obviously, the brain chemistry. Negative ionized air machines can be helpful for some people. Taking melatonin and vitamin D can be very helpful. So these are all ways of coping that lots of folks find some sort of relief.
I didn't realize melatonin.
Mhm.
That's great. Melatonin, vitamin D, light box. Great.
And then, those are the basics, but then there's other things too. And we can talk about that. I don't know if you want me to talk about that now, just in terms of, basic mental health, like what do you do during the winter? Now, I'll talk about myself. I don't have SADS in a clinical sense, but I'm sure a lot of people listening get kind of bummed out in the winter when it's dark and you're tired. So I wouldn't say I'm depressed, but I would say it goes on for a long time. I'm tired and it's not that great. And I can't wait till the light comes back in the spring. And in the old days, maybe I would go on a trip somewhere where it was sunny, but we can't do that now. So, that's what a lot of people do. I mean, how many of us who live in Vancouver save our money all year so we can go to Mexico for a week or something?
Yeah.
It's a very common thing when you live in Vancouver just to get the light. We can't do that this year.
Right. Yeah. Oh.
So what are we going to do? What do you do? So this is what we have to talk about. Sorry,
I
what were
think
you going to say?
yeah, I think it's going to be a tough year for everybody. I know I kind of battle with SAD every year. So not really kind of, I do. And
let me just ask you, Raquel, because I really want you to talk about that. When do you think you noticed that? At what point in your life, as a teenager, as an adult? Like, when did you realize there was some regularity to that?
I don't think I realized until I moved out. So I moved out at probably 18. I moved out and then went to university. And that's probably when I realized that I have that, because you're alone. So there's no other factors.
Yeah.
That it's not like your parents are annoying you or siblings or whatever. It was really, truly, I was the only person who could annoy myself. So, so I think that's really when I figured it out. One thing that I've found really helpful, because I'm a very early riser. And that's really hard in the dark, especially when you're dealing with SAD. So my boyfriend also deals with it. He didn't know about it until recently, because he's actually from South Africa. So he's from lots of light and he moved here as an adult. So this helps him as well too, but it's a light the alarm clock is the light. So it'll brighten the room to a really, really bright color. So it feels like daylight. And that's how I wake up. So it feels like a much more subtle, it's not like an instant turn on, it's a slow turn on. So now when I wake up, I feel like I'm exiting REM sleep already and I'm good and I've got more energy, and I find that really helpful. But I used to tan, but that's bad. We don't do that anymore.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of people will say that, but in fact, those aren't the right lights for SADS.
Yeah.
But I think it's the warmth and everything that does feel good. But now we do obviously know that's not good for us.
Yeah.
Just in terms of the possibility of getting
For tanning, you
skin.
mean?
Oh.
Yes.
Tanning people will be like, well, I tan, so I don't have SADS. And those lights aren't the same kinds of lights that you need in the eyeball in the morning kind of thing.
See, I never knew that. That's
I didn't know that either.
But we do know that, tanning is just not good for us for a whole bunch of reasons.
Yeah.
So we can't do that. Yeah. So besides the alarm, what else do you do, Raquel?
I try to exercise first thing. So summertime, I don't need to do it first thing. I can kind of go whenever, or I'll do a walk. When it starts hitting winter, I will drive out at 5 a.m., 5:30 a.m., go to the gym, finish by about 6:30. And I find that makes a world of difference. If I don't do that, my day is down. My productivity is down. My mood is down. I'm cranky. I'm sore. That's been a huge help for me.
That's great to know that.
And you're a very clean eater too, I would say. You're a clean eater.
I am. I will say the carb thing that you just mentioned, the tendency to eat more carbs. Wintertime, my body craves carbs like nobody's business. I want bagels and bread, and I want all of the carbs. So that is a very big truth for me. I try to stay away from it. But it's almost like my body doesn't want fresh foods, like soups and stuff for sure. But if I try to have like a salad in the winter, my body's just like, no, get it out of here.
Yeah.
So we've talked about SADS for a little bit. I wanted to circle back and kind of just put the pandemic cake on top of that, right? And, you know, as we're going through this, we're dealing with a lot of factors that are impacting us from a seasonal perspective. We have a lot of social movements that are happening that I think are well overdue. But this huge influx of information is happening to us, and we are doing our best to navigate a pandemic. How can we talk to the people around us and ourselves? I mean, what's some good self-talk that we can kind of have, Tam, to be able to say, okay, today I'm exhausted, and not jump to a conclusion of I'm depressed, I've got sad, I've got this, I've got that, because that's just self-diagnosing. And sometimes we just can't necessarily do that. So what would you say? How would you give us some kind of constructs to be like, hey, self, check in. How are you doing? What's going on?
What a good point. When you said, I think you used the word self-talk. Did you say, how are we going to talk to ourselves? I think about this a lot, because for those folks who have a tendency towards negative self-talk, and by that I mean they're very hard on themselves. The voice in their head is very judgmental towards the self, maybe even bordering on self-loathing. I'm talking about a lot of people, by the way. Okay, this isn't a small percentage. This is, I'm never good enough. I've done this wrong. What's the matter with me? It's this voice in our head that almost takes over. If that voice inside of you is fairly loud, this is going to be way more challenging, because you have to turn the volume down on that voice to say, we're in the middle of a pandemic, it's winter, it's a tough time, instead of what's the matter with me. If I was coping better, if I was stronger, if I was a better person, if I wasn't, quote, a loser, I'd be dealing with this so much better, like so-and-so is. So we have a negative voice in our head very often, and we always compare ourselves to others. First step is you got to check in with that voice. How loud is it? And give yourself permission to turn it down. So that is no small feat. That's a very challenging thing to do. So that's the first thing. Check in with yourself. You know what I'm talking about if that voice is loud and I'm talking to you. If you're like, yeah, I could be a little hard on myself, but you know, I'm kind of over that. That's awesome. A lot of people aren't there yet. We could have another conversation about where that voice comes from another time. But that is not something that, you know, we wake up with. This is part of our socialization, our conditioning since we were young. That's why it's so hard to break it. So first thing is, we have to be realistic at this time in our lives. And by realistic, I mean, I actually think for a lot of us, we've got to lower the bar. and not expect what we've always expected of ourselves in terms of our coping and in terms of our productivity. Now, I'm not saying give up, don't do anything. I'm saying what's realistic.
Mm.
And it's so important that we have to understand how all this is affecting us individually. Some people are doing great and some people are really challenged. So people, if you have an underlying mental health challenge, if you do have depression or anxiety, you're probably struggling a lot right now. And if you move into the winter during this pandemic and you really have a hard time, it's not because you're just not coping well, it's because there's so many factors. So number one, you have to begin, I think, to forgive yourself and not be so hard on yourself. I'm really big on self-compassion right now. And I don't mean to say that and just say, we should have more compassion for ourselves as a bunch of bullshit words. I'm talking about actually breathing it in. I am talking about really taking each day as it comes and doing the best you can and starting another day tomorrow. So I came up, when I was thinking about this last spring, I came up with this acronym, and it's BRAVE, because I think this is a time for us all to be very brave. So I'll just share this with you now, because I think it's to your point, Christina.
Mm-hmm.
So the B in BRAVE that I was thinking about begins with the breath. Our breath is what calms our anxiety. Our breath is what tells us we're alive, and our breath is something we can regulate. So we need to come back to our breath. And a great way to practice breathing is to count 4 breaths, 4 counts in and 4 counts out in your exhalation, 4 and 4. You breathe in for 4, you exhale for 4 or maybe 5 seconds. This is very self-regulating. So that's the B. You just remember to breathe. We're always breathing. You know how many times a day you breathe, Christina and Raquel?
3,184.
Raquel, what do you guess?
I don't even know. That's such a good question.
It's a weird question.
This
is good if you're ever at a party and you need a little, like a little fun fact.
12,000.
100,000.
12,000, 3,000, maybe 25 to 28,000 breaths a day. How many of those are you even aware of? Probably almost none. So breathing is very important. So the next part of the acronym, which is the R, BRAVE, is resilience. We are a very resilient species. So how do we tap into our inner resources? We think about, how have I survived hard times in the past? What did I do when I was bummed out or depressed? What do I do when I'm anxious in the past? So we all have ways that we've coped. And so R is for resilience. A is, back to your point, Christina, for acceptance. We have to accept this is a challenging, stressful time, and it is what it is, and we have to accept it. The V I came up with in BRAVE was vital signs. What are our vital signs? And that's, what do we do every day to practice self-care? And we're talking the minimum: drinking water, eating vegetables, doing a bit of activity, sleeping, laughing, turning your screen off a little bit, connecting with others. Those are your vital signs. That's what keeps you going. That's right. The V in BRAVE. And E, last letter, is equilibrium. And how do we find some equilibrium at a crazy time? What do you need for balance? What's your plan, and where's your structure? If you don't have a plan, it won't happen.
Right. So just going through them again, tell me one more time.
BRAVE. B is for breath. R is for resilience. A is for acceptance. V is for your vitals. What do you need in your life? And E is for equilibrium. How do I find balance? What's the structure and the plan?
Amazing. I
That's
love the
beautiful.
brave.
I apologize. This is our third interview and my phone just couldn't handle one more, so it's died on me. But Christina, could you let me turn on my video and then I can just continue on?
It's asking me to let you start. There we go.
Like, oh no, I love what you're talking about.
Well, I'm so glad you're back.
Yes,
Brave.
thank you. I
Because
could still hear.
I'm telling
So,
you, the reason why I was thinking about that last spring is I was seeing all these people in my life and my clients and all the folks I work with. And we were really brave, I thought, to begin to find ways to cope with this time that we knew so little then. And so then I was thinking, what are all the aspects of being brave?
Mm,
And truly, they're all of that stuff.
yeah.
the
Yeah, they really are.
four count breath, that's box breathing, right?
It is.
Yeah, I love box breathing. I do it all the time. I had a dentist appointment the other day and I box breathed right in there.
Did you?
Yeah.
Dentists will make you do that.
Oh my gosh. It was a high anxiety week and then it was a 2-hour dentist appointment on that to remove a
When you were,
crown.
oh, and you were just breathing.
I was just breathing through it. It was great.
So we've got not a lot of time left, but I really did want to go into hand it over to Raquel. Raquel's got a couple of specific situations.
Okay.
And I know that often these will be, we could talk about each one for an hour. But Tam, I like that you are so good at succinctly saying, here are a couple things you can do to
Mm.
help with this. So I'm going to hand over to Raquel for her to be able to ask those questions.
I don't really have anything too preset, but I thought we could just look at some scenarios that people are dealing with all the time. So I know right now in a lot of workplaces, mental health is a big topic, whether they're working in the office, which a lot of people aren't, thankfully. But there are a lot of people who are still in offices or still in jobs where they have to go in person. And I think tensions are really high and people are maybe a little bit quicker to take things personally. So just interpersonal conflict, knowing where everyone's at mentally right now and how anxiety is higher. Do you have any tips that people can kind of move forward with throughout the winter, throughout the rest of this pandemic?
I'll mention a few things, but I will say that from the folks that I work with, a lot of people were actually really happy that they could go back into the office because they were getting so isolated at home and really having a hard time and starting to get depressed, even though it was summer. A lot of the folks I have talked to were just really wanting to get back to work. So I thought that was interesting. And then there's a whole bunch of other people who are like, I'm never going back to the office. This is perfect for me. Like anything, when there is conflict, it can stay underground until there's a lot of stressors. So I think what you're saying is maybe things are kind of bubbling to the surface in a way they haven't been dealt with for a long time. If, for example, I'm just going to make this up, somebody is in a role and they haven't felt appreciated, and then they are working in their office during a pandemic where even more is asked of them because perhaps some people have lost their job and they were lucky enough to keep it. Just from an economic point of view, they had to let some people go. We all know people who've lost their jobs. So then they feel like, oh, wow, now I'm even less appreciated, but I can't say anything or ask for a raise because wherever I'm working is economically stressed. What do I do? Right?
Yeah.
A situation like that, I think, is quite common right now. And I think that as you know, I think we have to accept what's real and true and know that perhaps this isn't the time where you're going to be able to work everything out. So you have to, I think, prepare yourself every day before you go into work. Do your breathing. How are you going to not take things personally? How are you going to take a bit of distance if you need to? So a lot of this is within yourself, your own preparation. If you're in a situation, Raquel, and you're not prepared, you will just react and it won't go well. So right now you need to kind of prepare and also be realistic about what you can ask for, what you can work out. I believe in difficult conversations. So sometimes those are going to have to be had at a workplace. Sometimes talking verbally isn't the way to go because it's too intense. Sometimes you need to kind of have an email back and forth with people. Sometimes you have to just say, you know what? It's only my job and I'm not going to get so invested in it. It's just a job. It's not all of who I am. So these are some general responses to what you're asking. And of course, every situation is different. But right now, you know, instead of living fully, sometimes we have to accept we're in a bit of a survival mode, and that's just how it is.
Yeah, I think survival mode, that's the perfect way to put it, because it's a long survival mode that we're in. I feel like those are supposed to be short, aren't they?
I know, and this is long.
This
is long for sure.
Yeah. I also kind of within the same realm, what about significant others? So going back to a lot of people are working from home, a lot of people have both significant others working at home. And if you're in a city like Vancouver or Toronto or LA or New York, a lot of people are in very small homes or apartments. I think there's a lot of make or break in this time, where people will either really do well or they're going to just be at each other's throats. So do you have any tips on how people can nurture their relationship throughout this time?
So many. This is my business. This is all I do. That's all we should talk about. 3 words. Let it go. Everything can be encompassed in those 3 words. Listen, let's be real. When you have a lot of unresolved issues in a relationship and you're in a small apartment working at the same kitchen table, you're going to irritate the hell out of each other. And all of those unresolved things are going to just bubble up. It's going to be really hard. That's the make or break you're talking about, I think. On top of that, all the life stress and all of that stuff. And the reason why I say let it go is I absolutely mean it. You have to see this as a time. It's a time that is very unnatural. So dialing down criticism, expectations, irritations is so key. How do you do that? You come from your highest self. You put on your big girl pants, your big boy pants, your big person pants, your big pants, and you get over yourself. So I'm very much about coming from a place of kindness, flexibility, and patience right now. When I say this is my business, it's because this is what I do. In my practice is I work so much with couples who are in the situation you are talking about. And it is so unnatural and so difficult. People are spending too much time together. You know, they don't get to go and hang out with people at the office, which for so many people is really social. Mm-hmm. People are sick of Zoom. And so they're getting really stressed. And then what do when you're in a relationship? You take it out on each other. That's mm-hmm. what happens. Now, if you aren't in a relationship and you're living alone, you can also become very lonely.
That's a whole nother, and a lot of people who are maybe wanting to date and
Oh,
can't.
that is such a big thing right now.
It is.
Oh my God, I talk to so many folks, so many people on Hinge. How are you meeting? What are you doing? And there's one part of it, I know I'm getting off track here, but there's a part of it that I think is actually good. It slows everything down.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that people are getting to know each other. You know, there seems to be this whole period on texting and then FaceTime, and then maybe we'll meet, but it has to be distant. And then we've got to check who's seeing who and who's in whose life. And then we can't really even touch for 2 or 3 weeks. It's kind
There's a
of
courtship all of a
interesting.
sudden.
I know. I mean, maybe I'm old school, but I think it's kind of a cool thing. But it is very difficult for sure if you know, dating is tough right now. But not yeah, so I don't know if that answered your question, but truly the less pressure on the relationship, the better. Having fun, keeping it light sometimes, just watching a movie or a series. You know, so many clients I am talking to now, they're into series together. And they're, you know, and people are like, God, that's not very good. You know, like there's nothing connecting about watching TV together. BS, of course there is. It's something you do together every night. You're enjoying it. It's fun. You know, it doesn't always have to be intense and heavy and beautiful.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just getting through. But I really have seen a lot of people break up through this time, no question.
Well, my roommate is a midwife. And so during the beginning of this pandemic, her and her friends were estimating that we would have an influx of new babies. And I said, oh no, no, you're going to have an influx of divorces. I don't know if any of y'all have been in this situation before, but let me tell you. No, I think it is really difficult, but I do have faith. I think when people pull through, that it can be very, very strengthening and very bonding to actually be forced to be in a situation where you have to communicate.
I agree with you completely. You have to communicate. You have to find new things to do together.
Yes.
And you have to find also ways to take space from each other in a small space and continue your life, because too much togetherness is too much. That's not healthy for a relationship either. So you have to find a way to do stuff with your friends. I'm very big on getting outside every day and going for walks and doing things with other people, and not putting all of the pressure and needs on a relationship.
To be
It's
your
too much.
be all end all best friend, partner, confidant.
Exactly. It's too much.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I need you to come back on here, please, because I have so many more questions, and I know that you have so many more answers on this topic.
Well, I appreciate that feedback. It would be my pleasure. But it's like any conversation. It leads to more conversation.
It does. It
Yeah.
does.
Good
And I know we
conversation.
have to end it because everyone has things to do, but I'm gonna write down my questions for another time. So
My pleasure. I would be very happy to come and keep chatting about all of this and more.
oh, thank you so
Tam.
much.
You've been amazing.
Oh, thank you. It's been just my real tremendous pleasure to do this with you today. Thank you for giving me the space to tell you what I think, and happy to come back anytime.
Where can people find you if they're looking for help dealing with couples or mental health, or they're dealing with sad work? How can they find you?
One of a couple ways, just under my name,
Mm-hmm.
Tamara Adilman. I do have a website. The kind of couples therapy I do is called Imago, IMAGO relationship therapy. So my website is imagovancouver.com. For people who are looking on the BC Counseling website, I come up there. So I think if you just Google my name, I come up and it's easy.
Thanks for listening, bombshells. In order to continue to elevate, subscribe and don't forget to click that little bell so you can get notified every time we have a new badass brunch. Until next time, stay focused, fierce, and fabulous.